Okay. Welcome to the Evanston Public Library and our webinar on garden cleanup with good insects in mind. My name is Julie Rand. I'm a librarian at the library, and I'd like to welcome Leslie Shad from Natural Habitat Evanston. Leslie serves on the board of Citizens Greener Evanston, and she was a founder and co-leads Natural Habitat Evanston. She formerly served on the board of the National Wildlife Federation and has been interested in environmental issues for some time. Just a little information about Natural Habitat Evanston. This organization works to restore and maintain habitat for pollinators and birds, and to build a culture that recognizes the value of habitat. And Leslie added a personal note, which is that she and her husband, Joe Brennan, are working to restore forested wetlands in Northwest Indiana. So I'm going to turn the meeting over to Leslie. Thanks, Leslie.
Thank you so much. I greatly appreciate being able to speak to everyone. Some of you folks I recognize, so I think you've heard some of this content before, but I would welcome your ideas and feedback and suggestions. So I'm going to share my screen to a PowerPoint and then hopefully get it starting from the beginning here. And okay, so I'm Leslie Shad from Natural Habitat Evanston. And typical lawn maintenance, you probably are familiar with this. Mow every other week or so, fertilize, water during growing season, broadleaf herbicide, and often insecticides to get rid of grubs, herbicide walkways, blow leaves and dust away from plants, mulch leaves and plant stalks and haul them away is typical. So instead of those things, here's another suggestion. So that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit. This person still has lawn. This is Judy Pollock's garden. 2 steps to easily advance climate action, community health, and biodiversity is to do less. Reduce your lawn and leave the leaves and plant stalks. Lawn in particular is the largest irrigated crop in the United States. It's more land use than corn, wheat, and fruit trees combined, according to NASA imagery. It is also opposes climate and health challenges. We waste a ton of water on lawns. Generally, we overwater, and 30 to 60% of our municipal freshwater supplies are spent on lawn, irrigating lawn. Toxins, we apply toxins at about 10 times the average rate of that a farmer applies. In addition to that, we use lawn equipment, blowers and mowers, and they stir up particulates. And in Evanston, we already have, obviously, the coronavirus going on, and asthma in Evanston is a little higher than it is across Illinois. So we could use with clean air. And then there's the noise, but we'll talk a little bit more about that. I think I have to admit somebody. And let me see, why can I not advance my, oh, there we go. All right. But one thing close to my heart is biodiversity. Insect and bird populations are declining, and we all have personal, I think, experience with that, actually. If you look at the cartoon in the upper right, many of us may remember 20 years ago driving for some hours in a car and having our windshield be pretty spattered with insects. And now I know that I can drive from here to Ohio and have 2 insects on my windshield. Songbirds have declined 30%, monarchs 90%. The population dropped again in Mexico this year, which I was really hoping for not bad news. The rusty patch bumblebee is the only federally listed pollinator in the United States as an endangered species. And it was once common in the Chicago area, and now it's declined by 87%. So, we need to make progress here, I should say. I'm not going to go through all details on the slides. We'll make the slide deck available to you all. Mayflies are down 50%, and that's a picture of a little mayfly in the lower right. But this all is validated globally as well, so you can look at that later. The New York Times did an article on the decline of insect populations, and a comment that rung deeply to me was, we often pay attention to the megafauna of monarchs and of other insects and birds that we care about. But they mentioned that the deeper worry is that a whole insect world might be going missing. I mean, that actually is scary to me, honestly, and incredibly sad. So one suggestion I mentioned was to do less, and this is about cleanup. So doing less, leave the leaves and plant stalks. Why would we bother with that? Why is that on my my list here? Well, one reason is that most insects overwinter in our yards. There are insects like the monarch that migrates, but actually that's not that common, actually. Most insects are right in our yards during the winter time. And in addition to that, birds seek out the insects in the leaf litter, and they also take cover in the leaf litter during winter. So what we're proposing is rake the leaves around trees and shrubs and into wildflower beds. You don't leave them on your lawn. Lawns, if you have a lawn, lawns can take about 30% coverage with leaves, apparently. That's what I'm told. But you do need to get them off your lawns. But rake them around trees and shrubs, and leave a little space around trees and shrubs, like 3 inches, so that the trees and shrubs can breathe and they avoid rot. That's avoid volcano mulch is what you say. And this is a picture of the rusty patch bumblebee, the endangered bee. Just as an example of why, because I'm suggesting, that we leave the leaves until the leaves deteriorate. In other words, now this is the time of year when a lot of people start saying to me, well, now can I clean up my leaves? And I really want to encourage people. I mean, obviously, you're the boss of your own property, but I really want to encourage people to leave their leaves and plant stalks and just let them deteriorate. I'll talk about plant stalks in a minute, but this is the purplish copper. It is in Illinois, but it's not that common. It lays eggs on very common, what we would say is weeds, basically, on dock and smartweed. This is a picture of probably a weed that many of us have seen around Evanston, if not in our yards. I definitely have it around my yard. The egg is greenish white. It's laid singly on leaves. They emerge 8 to 10 days after warm weather starts. So that means really when you have solidly in the 50s warm weather. So that's already talking about late April or May. And they emerge 8 to 10 days, but of course they emerge as a caterpillar, right? And caterpillars take about usually 3 weeks to develop into butterflies. So really, this is an insect that we'd like to encourage, and they are not able to take flight until sometime around June, most likely. So that's what I'm saying about trying to leave leaves as long as we can. And we're saying this is an insect we want to encourage. Well, all these insects we want to encourage. This is an insect in trouble, but it's not that much different from most of the other insects that I'm talking about. A lot of caterpillars overwinter as caterpillars, and some overwinter actually as adults, but basically they overwinter as caterpillars. The Baltimore checker spot and the great spangled fritillary, which is a violet fritillary, they're both pictured here with their host plants, and they rely on the Baltimore checker spot relies on white turtlehead, and of course the fritillary relies on violets. And most endearing about these species, but also a lot of species just burrow right down next to their favorite food source. This I can almost imagine, when my boy was a toddler, he would fall asleep while eating. This is kind of what they're doing. So this is, just a behavior of the caterpillars. But again, they don't really emerge until it starts to get warm. Other insects that we tuck into the leaves. Some of these are the tawny mining bee. The mining bees are basically make burrows underground. And I think I have to share results of the poll. Okay, so let's see if I can keep doing this. I can't see my Can't see my PowerPoint. Okay, now I can see my PowerPoint. So the tawny mining bee, they make little holes in the topsoil and they burrow in there during the winter. Mason bees are, many people know about those from the tubes that are used for little bee hotels. There are issues with that and avoiding pathogens in the little bee hotels, but those are in plant stalks. The firefly is pretty much tucked into any space it can get protection from, and maybe underground as a glowworm. The larva is sometimes called a glowworm, but it can also be in under bark or in the leaves. The the bumblebees, what happens to bumblebees is basically bumblebees, just the queen overwinters, the rest are dead. And the queen overwinters often looking for mouse burrows, tucks in under there and spends the winter in the burrow, and then starts to eat and in springtime and bring back pollen and starts their hive in springtime. The native ladybird beetle, ladybug, is not the one that crowds into your house. That's the Asian ladybug, but the native ladybug also is under leaves or in any kind of shelter it can find. And we often talk about the woolly bear moth. Well, the woolly bear moth is the Isabel tiger moth. A woolly bear caterpillar is the Isabel tiger moth. And that also is just in the leaf litter, basically. So trying to protect those guys. And why would we bother about plant stalks? Well, these are the guys who are in the plant stalks. You can see the Luna moth in the lower left and look at its cocoon. Its cocoon looks like leaves. I think if its cocoon dropped into leaf litter, you would never, or was hanging from a plant stalk, you probably would not notice it. Same thing with the swallowtail cocoon, which is in the lower right. And then there are galls on things like, which are these bulbous areas on goldenrod. This is a goldenrod gall fly. They're super, super common. And in fact, in the Northwest Indiana place that I'm restoring, there were just tons of galls all over the area there. So that's very, very common. And then, you know, our walking sticks and mantises lay their eggs on stalks. So we'd like to, you know, not mulch up the leaves or the plant stalks. The hope would be that if we do need to, or we do want to clean up our plant stalks in springtime, that we wait until it's warm enough and then we break them off and put them in some sheltered space. So not mulching them, but allowing whatever may be in there to emerge. And many people ask about rakes versus leaf blowers. This is like, you know, choose your weapon. You know, leaf blowers do blast nature at speeds of up to 200 miles per hour. So if you're an insect egg, you may be scrambled by this, you know, leaf blower action. In addition, leaf blowers turn up 5 pounds of whatever was on the ground per hour. So that can include animal feces, pollen, chemicals, anything you put on your lawn. You know, just, you know, that's, you know, that people end up breathing. And the two-stroke engine of a lawnmower, actually of a lawnmower or a leaf blower, is very inefficient, and it can even spew some fuel. Many people notice that when they're actually using the equipment. But the California Air Resources Board reports that 1 hour of leaf blowing equals 1,100 miles of driving at 50 miles per hour. 55 miles per hour. In addition, there's the noise levels, and obviously the yard crew. It's not only the noise level; it's also the decibel, the pitch of the noise is particularly piercing, especially on leaf blowers. Yard crews are most impacted, but you know, we're all dealing with it. So the other big suggestion of climate action and community health and biodiversity was to mow less. I mean, I'm characterizing mowing less as part of cleaning up, which I think it is. So the reason to reduce, well, one way to reduce mowing is to reduce turf grass. Turf grass is basically of very little ecological value to insects. There's no seed. We chop it, we trim it before it can produce seeds or nectar or pollen in the most for the most part. It's non-native grass, usually European or Asian grass. The concept of lawns was a wealthy European estate sort of, it was so hard to maintain a lawn, you needed a crew to do it. And so it became a symbol of having arrived, I suppose, that you had a lawn. And it also displaces native plants. So if you want to have your turf grass, maybe you can mow less often and let clover, creep in and dandelions bloom, maybe even some violets so you can get some fritillaries. So, at least stretch out the mowing. This photo is of Lovelace Park, where the city has agreed that they would allow an area of the park to be unmowed. It's sort of, it's the first time in Evanston that they've really committed to allowing an area unmowed that isn't a natural garden, actually. It's just a meadow. And accidentally, they did mow it, in fact, in the fall, but that they said that was an accident and they will allow it to be unmowed. But the city has been very concerned that people will object to this meadow. So we did a little campaign of having people call or text 311 and tell the city how beautiful this unmowed meadow is. And we'll probably do that again when there's a little height back on the grass to reassure the city that people like an unmowed meadow. So another alternative to mowing is to transform lawn to a native area. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and not too long, hopefully, but here's an example. This is my lovely neighbor around the corner who has a parkway that was of grass, and now it is a little shade garden. You can replace your turf grass with shrub, trees, and wildflowers, reduce your lawn size. You can also add, instead of turf grass, you can add native grass. Buffalo grass is probably 4 inches tall and is a native grass. Pennsylvania, and it grows in sun. Pennsylvania and ivory sedge is grass-like, and they grow in shade. Pennsylvania sedge in particular will kind of spread out and look more like turf. It's longer than buffalo grass, though. It's probably 6 inches or so. And then there are native ground covers, like what Nancy has done in this garden, is to use wild ginger and sedum. Sedum is in more of a sunnier area, ferns. There are also no-mow mixes that are for the most part, they're non-native mixes because they go in sun and shade. But in any case, you're not mowing them as much. And so you're getting all the health benefits, and they can go to produce some nectar and some pollen for insects. So even if it's a non-native no-mow, it's better than turf grass that we just are mowing all the time. Here's another example of this was a Pachysandra garden. This is actually Nancy's front yard, Pachysandra garden that has become native. And have another example. This is another friend's garden where she has turf grass, but she has added a pollinator garden just to reduce some of her turf area. So continuing on I want to talk a little bit more about native plants that you might use to replace your turf. So I hope you'll give me license to do that a little bit. But who pollinates? This list is from bees at the most efficient pollinator down to bats. We don't really have pollinating bats here. We mostly have insect-eating bats. But bees, flies, and ants, wasps, butterflies are kind of midway down on the effective pollinator scale here. But all of these are important to food and fauna, and then also, of course, wind and water can pollinate. Some ways to not to be an effective garden for biodiversity and also not anger your neighbors too much. These are just some suggestions. First of all, pollinators need host plants and nectar plants, and we're going to talk more about that. And actually nectar and pollen plants. We're going to talk a little bit more about what host plants are. We really want to encourage straight natives, not cultivars. Cultivars and not non-natives. Cultivars tend to have some name in the something like ivory stunner or something like that in quotation marks as part of the name of the plant, or it'll say Jacob Mendel or something, or there'll be some added name to the native plant name. And so that kind of can give you a tip off that that's not a straight native. It's not to say that cultivars are all bad. A lot of them, some of them have been tested, and essentially Doug Tallamy is a person who is a entomologist from the University of Delaware and has spearheaded some of the testing of this with Mount Cuba as a nursery out east. And the cultivars that have altered petals or different foliage color in particular, it appears that their chemistry changes in the plant, and so that they no longer are digestible or as palatable for insects. So certain cultivars are problematic, but we haven't tested all the cultivars, so we don't really know which ones are okay. And we think a lot of them, when you think about altered petal shape, a lot of cultivars have altered petal shape. What we don't know about, but what might be okay is more often has tested as okay is shorter cultivars may not be as damaging or as ineffective as host plants as some of these other things, but different colors, different petals, those are concerns. And that's very common among, oftentimes they're breeding for those sorts of features in a cultivar. So for me, I'm just encouraging straight natives. Group species, the same type of species together to attract pollinators. They're going to look for big groups of what they want to eat. Some spots of bare soil is helpful for like minor bees that I mentioned. Avoid insecticides and herbicides because we don't want to kill what we're trying to foster. Herbicides, for example, glyphosate. Glyphosate is started as an antibiotic. So when you put herbicide on glyphosate on, you're actually putting antibiotic on your soil biota. So you are killing soil biota when you're using glyphosate. It's not to say that there aren't, on ecological restorations, glyphosate, is, really relied on for some ecological restorations. But in our yards, in our little yards, I think we should try to avoid insecticides and herbicides. Some of this is obvious, height toward the back. Then containers, deeper the better, at least 12 inches, but to overwinter, you need a 3 foot deep. So like one of those cedar 3 foot deep containers is what you'd go for overwintering in some native plants in containers. You have to water a lot if you have plants in containers. So to reduce the evaporation, metal, plastic, or glazed ceramic reduces the evaporation. You can also have to consider the weight of the container if you're on a balcony. For winter, you need to also consider what won't get broken by the expanding and contraction of the freezing. In the ground, sedge or grass on the outer edges to avoid plants flopping over onto walkways. And it also looks like an intentional garden more with grass or sedge on the outer edge. Plant densely. A focus point densely reduces weeds, and it also sort of goes with this grouping species together. It also gives insects hiding places. Focus points like paths, stepping stones, fountains, bird baths, rocks are appealing for people, and that's can be important. Rocks also divert dog pee away from your plantings. And a sign can tell you what's going on, so tell your neighbors what's going on. So perhaps build some tolerance there as well. A good friend of mine was looking at his milkweed plants and saw milkweed bugs on his milkweed plants. And he said, we have to be team milkweed here. So we got to get rid of these bugs. And I just want to encourage a higher level of tolerance toward insect damage. We really, we are in a deep problem with insect population. Sorry about that. And we really have to think in terms of team biodiversity rather than trying to protect our plants or trying to purely garden for insects or even purely for birds. We really have to think about biodiversity and welcome everyone to our gardens. And I hope we will. these are just, again, we're going to share out the slide deck, but the USDA has some very helpful layouts of native plants, and the Audubon and National Wildlife Federation, and also Prairie Moon is a nursery that have very helpful native plant search functions. So these are just resources. At Natural Habitat Evanston, we're trying to make it easier for homeowners to get parkway plantings approved by the city. It already is actually very easy, but we just thought it would be simpler if we can share out designs with some seeds and plants to get people started. So this is not yet approved by the city. I don't think actually these exact plants will be approved. We're waiting to hear back, but the initial thought is actually, heartleaf aster, they weren't so sure about. So in any case, when we get there, we will share out some designs that hopefully are pre-approved by the city. I mentioned host plants. Many people know that monarchs need milkweed. Well, 90% of insects need some kind of plant in order to develop from caterpillar to adult. So it isn't just about milkweed. Violet fritillaries, you saw them earlier, need violets. The pearl crescent needs asters. The eastern comma needs elms. Nettles, nettles are very common around Evanston. Probably many people pull them as a weed, but we have non-stinging nettles. I should have actually included a photo of those up here. They are, I bet a lot of people pull them, and yet they're very important for butterflies. So, yeah. In any case, and I should mention also that 96% of land nestlings, so that means basically not ducks, but land birds need insects to raise their clutch of nestlings, especially caterpillars, because of the special chemicals that are in the caterpillars from eating all these leaves. You need 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to raise a clutch of chickadees. So insects are important not only for biodiversity, but they are, of course, one of the key foundations of the food chain here and for birds. Douglas Tallamy, who I mentioned earlier, has ranked plants according to their wildlife value as measured in caterpillar species. I mentioned caterpillars are kind of a foundation insect because who eats caterpillars? Well, spiders eat caterpillars, other insects eat caterpillars, birds, fish, amphibians, reptiles, even chipmunks and skunks, a lot of things eat caterpillars. So this ranking, these are the tops of his, on this side are the forbs, which means the herbaceous plants. The goldenrods support 112 species in Illinois. This is Illinois numbers. In Illinois of caterpillar species. Asters, 107 caterpillar species. Wild strawberry, these are referring to the native varieties of these. Wild strawberries, 64 species of caterpillar. But if you look at the tree species, oaks blow everybody away. Oaks are the top keystone species. Nationally, more than 500 species of caterpillars rely on oaks. In Illinois, 456 species of caterpillar rely on oaks. So when you're thinking about what to plant in your garden, a lot of people think goldenrods may be untidy, but there are some goldenrods that are a little bit better behaved, not as aggressive, and these are important species to try to fit into your plan. So avoiding pesticides and lawn chemicals, I mentioned that. The only thing I'm going to really call out here is our neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids are the most common insecticide in the United States. This is the chemical that you're looking for in the ingredients list if you're buying something at a nursery. Neonicotinoids are not only poisonous to insects, but also, according to the American Bird Conservancy, one seed coated with neonicotinoid can kill a song sparrow. So they are highly toxic, and the problem is that the insecticide is systemic. So many nurseries, well, actually, all nurseries that we have checked locally that sold non-native or cultivar plants use neonicotinoids. Neonicotinoids generally are not used on, we haven't found any native plants where neonicotinoids are used in nurseries, but definitely they use them on non-natives and cultivars. And in fact, the city we were just helping the city at the tree fund. I'm also trying to, we've started a tree fund to help the city buy trees and protect trees. And 31 elms that we were helping the city buy, the nursery was doing a soil drench of neonicotinoids before shipment. And we said, don't do that. But the problem with that is that after the soil is drenched with neonicotinoids, that tree is toxic to wildlife, essentially to birds and insects, but increasingly there are even studies about deer. That tree is toxic to wildlife for at least 3 to 6 years. The insecticide, because it's systemic, spreads from the roots throughout the nectar, the pollen, the seeds, the entirety of the plant. And that persists. In a study of rhododendron treated, the neonicotinoid persisted for 3 to 6 years. Depending upon different parts of the plant were more toxic than others. So common brands, Ortho and Bayer, not everything from Ortho and Bayer have neonicotinoids, but check the label. So this is my last slide. This is my yard. And this is to encourage people to get started replacing your lawn. You can see in the corner here, this was my existing non-native lawn. I decided I wanted it to be native. So I put down cardboard. This is called cardboard lasagna gardening. Put down cardboard. On top of that, I put mulch and compost. You can actually see that the lighter brown is mulch and there's compost. So I wasn't I didn't mix it very well there, I gotta say. Really, it should be 4 to 6 inches of compost or mulch, and you can put seeds right in there. And I did this in April, and by August, it started to look like a garden. This is buffalo grass that I mentioned as a replacement for turf, and I just included, turf-like grass. Not that I love it, but I think that it is more gets more acceptance from my neighbors. And this is my oak tree here. So that's it. And then I have an appendix here giving more information about how to get involved. This is about, Evanston has been certified as a community wildlife habitat by National Wildlife Federation. We did that to try to encourage people to get the basics down: food, water, cover, a place to raise young, which of course can be milkweed and other host plants, and to take some sustainable steps. But now we're also encouraging people to how to do it, to leave the leaves, no pesticides, mow less, reducing light pollution, which is really wasted light. And the idea here is that we'd like, this is from Natural Habitat Evanston, this is a free pledge. And we're trying to send the word that there are people in Evanston who care about bug-friendly gardening. We want to tell yard companies and try to encourage them to create a bug-friendly yard maintenance package. And also we want the city to leave its leaves and to take some other steps like that. This is the non-neonicotinoid nurseries. You can also look for native plant sales. And in fact, Natural Habitat Evanston is having a plant sale with the Evanston Environment Association, and people will be pre-purchasing. Everyone can pre-purchase the plants and then pick them up at the Civic Center May 22nd. But there are others doing this too. Chicago Audubon is also a May 22nd pickup, I happen to know. And Bessie Rhodes is doing a native plant sale right now that you can find on their website. I should have put that one up. These are just species lists for year-round, giving birds and insects year-round forage. It's important to go from early pollen and nectar in the springtime to late berries and nuts in winter. So. And these are berries and fruit trees and seed and nut trees. Here are some resource lists. And also in the blue is the how to certify with National Wildlife Federation or to sign up for the pollinator pledge. I have a little bit on container gardens here, if that's of interest, and then all of my sources. And we are having another talk with Possibility Places botanists on March 11th. And then we'll have a conversation about native plants at a lunch and learn at the library come April 8th. So that's the end of this. Thank you so much for your time and your patience listening through that. And I'd love to talk to people.
Yes, I did enable chat, but apparently you have to end the meeting and then start it again for it to work. So if anyone would like to ask a question, please go right ahead. Why don't you open up your camera so that we know that you want to speak. If you, Mary, you had your hand up?
Hi, yeah. We have strawbill gardens that like 5 or 6 strawbills that we've been doing for several years, about 6 years. And we just noticed jumping worms last fall. And I want to ask about how to get rid of them, because I don't think they're good for our garden.
Yeah, well, there's the University of Illinois Extension Office has information on basically, sprinkling mustard, and then that causes them to come up, and you can collect them. Honestly, I think it's pretty labor intensive. I think we're in it to win it on the jumping worms. They are problematic, and especially for forest areas, I think. But I don't have a good solution on that. But the extension office does have some information on jumping worms if you Google that. I have talked with the extension office about it, and they still want us to report if there are jumping worms around. But I mean, my yard has jumping worms too. I mean, I think we've got jumping worms here. They're non-native. I mean, earthworms are non-native for the other people. Earthworms are non-native, but jumping worms in particular are very voracious eaters. They consume mulch much more quickly, and they can create sort of granular poop or whatever, frass that can make it hard for plants to take root and flourish. So they are a problem.
Okay.
Okay, we have a question from Christina, and then after her, Lynn.
Hi, I just wanted to ask, so I live in a condo building and I'm kind of the unofficial condo building gardener. And I have a problem. So we have 2 parkways that I try to maintain, and there are a lot of perennials in there right now. And I have a problem with people letting their dogs go to the bathroom in there, but working on that. But when you talk about not cleaning up like leaves and stalks and stuff, how then does stuff come up in the spring, because it's not getting any light from the leaf coverage, and then the stalks, do you clean them up in the spring? Or
no, you don't really have to. It is true that tulips coming up, sometimes tulips will have trouble getting through the leaf litter, but native plants, this is how native plants live. They will just push and find their way through, and the leaves actually are fertilizer.
Right.
I mean, leaves are the way that trees are overwintering their fertilizer. So really, there are, I'm agreeing with you on crocuses and tulips. They have trouble getting through leaves sometimes, or sometimes they'll be curled funny sort of by the constriction of a leaf, but for the most part, no, there really isn't a big problem with that, and basically just putting it around the trees. If you're worried about your flower beds, then put it around trees and shrubs.
Thanks, Christina. Lynn?
Oh, muted. Oh.
What do you mean by light pollution? Can you give a few words about
yes,
that?
I'd love to tell you about light pollution. So light pollution is wasted light. So and wasted light means, so if you are, what we really should be doing is using motion sensors. Light pollution is the where and when. You want light at certain places and at certain times. And so you can use, all I'm recommending is motion sensors, amber lights, which are not as attractive to insects. Also using shades so that your light is projected where you want it and not just projecting up into the air. The city of Evanston is doing that as they replace their lights, putting shades more on the inside of their standing lights, and then also turning off unnecessary lights. And the reason for this is insects and birds, they have shown that there is unnatural levels of predation around lights for insects, especially moths, because what quickly learns to hang out by the lights are spiders and bats and birds. I mean, these are all good species, but there is a higher level of predation than is natural because of lights. So just more natural lights. And for birds, migratory birds tend to have more window collisions because they're they can be disoriented by lights. They can also, if there's a light beam, they can kind of get caught up and not realize how to get out of a light beam when it's, people have those big beams focused up into the air. And then for even resident birds, there's more successful breeding with dark skies. And in fact, humans are healthier with darker skies. So and there's a really good website, darksky.org, that can give you a lot more information about this. I mean, it's also just important for, climate and unnecessarily wasting light using carbon. There are pictures of Chicago is about 1 million smaller than Berlin, but Berlin is much darker than Chicago. It's there are big cities that can conserve more energy than we do. So anyway, that's light pollution.
Does anyone else have a question they'd like to ask?
I have a question.
Melissa?
Yes.
Melissa Foster and then Melissa Senko.
Yeah, this is Melissa Foster. So yeah, Leslie, you were, when you were talking about, cease and desist on pulling leaves and stalks out of your flower beds, but then you said something about, if you must, or if, you just can't stand it, cutting the stalks. I don't know which height. That was what was interesting. Then you said, put them in a little pile, put it aside, in a warm place, or in other words?
Well, in a dry, basically. So the idea is, if there are mason bees, and there could be eggs on this, there could be cocoons, and there can be walking stick and mantis eggs on the stalks. So the idea is to hand tear them off. I'll tell you, if you get to like March and you haven't taken down, well, now more or less, and you haven't taken down plant stalks, they're very brittle, they break easily. But in order to not squish, like if you just cut them and mulch them, you'll chop up whatever is inside there. So I'm not encouraging that. I'm just saying break them off and put them someplace dry and sheltered is what I'm talking about. So like under a shrub or tree. I mean, the other thing is that, ideally birds would be able to continue to eat these if they aren't too moldy. The seeds, because the seeds, they not only have seeds in the seed head, but they're insects in the seed heads. I don't know how many people may have collected seeds, but if you've ever tapped out a seed head, a bazillion little bugs go running for cover. There's lots of bugs in your seed heads. So I'm just saying, try to avoid some moldy location, but basically, I mean, for me, I mean, I'm going to leave out my seed heads.
Yeah, no, cool. I have some, and this is not native, but I have some daisies, and they grow to they're I don't know, 2 feet high in July. Around about June, I mean, they're just looking so scruffy, but it is, as you say, you can just pull it, yank it. Careful not to pull out the leaves. But anyway, with the stalk like that, I'm assuming that also could be sheltering eggs and caterpillars and stuff.
I do think so. I do think so, especially for the stalks, because it's not as if for example, the mason bees aren't necessarily eating these things. I mean, they're just looking for a hollow stalk, right? Okay. So yeah, I think probably even on non-natives you would find typically it's like Joe Pye weed. That's like a perfect stalk, long and straight, and it's hollow and that kind of thing.
Yeah. All right. Thank you.
Sure.
And the other Melissa, I think you wanted to ask a question.
I did. Hi, thank you so much for doing this. So I've left all my leaves down. I'm going to go outside and yank out my stalks. And then do you mulch on top of that then, or you just let the leaf? I mean,
leaves really are mulch.
yeah.
I mean, really, leaves are fertilizer. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure that I would basically say you don't really need mulch. I'm not against mulch, I hope it's organic if you're putting it down, but really leaves are mulch. So, see how it does. Try it a year and see whether that doesn't, sort of take care of you. I also just feel like, all of this should be accessible to everybody. And,
Sure.
it's, if we can avoid applications of things, it makes, gardening more accessible to so many people. So, yeah, I mean, no, I'm not sure that you'll need mulch. I have, what happens is you get richer and richer soil because the leaves are deteriorated in the soil. So that's what fertilizer is about, really, and mulch is about.
Thanks.
Thanks. Patricia, you had a question?
I do. Hi, Leslie.
Hi.
What about grasses, tall grasses?
Yeah.
In terms of cutting them down in the spring or?
Well, and most of those grasses are going to be non-native. If they've got a big plume on the top, that's an ornamental grass. So, I mean, I would say the same, you're going to have to use, first of all, probably, the right answer is leave them if you can stand it. If you can't stand it, then you're going to probably have to cut them down because they're going to be too dense to tear. But then also try to, leave them, there may still be insects in there. So I would say still leave them in use them as fertilizer and let it deteriorate. Those are probably, there is, different there are native tall grasses, but if they have like a plume, if they look ornamental, they're probably a non-native grass, which is okay. But
if I leave them, the new grass will just come up?
Yeah, new grass still grows. It does still grow. Maybe I would say if they're non-native grasses, they probably do need to get cut down because just like the tulips and the crocuses, non-natives are a little more persnickety, and I think that they come back as a smaller bunching. Sometimes, in other words, sometimes it'll be in a different shape and not the whole thing will come back up. So if you're trying to foster the, ornamental grasses, yeah, you might have to cut them down come probably May or before you really have to cut them down. And the later, the better for insects that are in there. And then try not to, mulch them, or chop them up, just cut them and put them in some protected area in case for the insects in there.
Thank you.
I thought.
So Leslie, I have something to add. I'm a volunteer at the Lurie Garden and they don't use any pesticides and it's all supposed to be sustainable gardening. And for the last couple years, in order to provide, I guess you could call it habitat for insects, what they do is in the spring, they will cut back some of the plants that have hollow stems and they leave about 15 inches. And the plants that they leave the stalks on tend to be taller ones. So it does look a little bit unsightly at the beginning of the growing season, but by the time the plants are mature, you can't see those stalks anymore. And yet they've continued to provide habitat for insects.
Right.
So that's another thing that you could consider doing.
Right.
If you don't mind it looking kind of shaggy at the beginning of the season.
Yeah. My only worry about that would be seed heads, but maybe they're choosing plants that are not that valuable for birds. So, but yeah. Can we, Mary?
Mary?
I want to thank you again for being here. You had said something earlier about bee hotels and that there was a problem with bee hotels. Could you?
Yeah. So, well, Xerces is a really good nonprofit that is concerned about it. XERCES. They are very concerned about pollinators and insects, and they're not totally against bee hotels, but what can happen is that they can get moldy and pathogens can be in there.
Okay.
So really those tubes should be cleaned out, or people sometimes do liners, paper liners on the inside. So there does need to be some kind of maintenance of those. They do need to get periodically cleaned out. you also, we have found that, woodpeckers figure out that's where the bee larva is. So just so you know, and also parasitic wasps also figure out that bee larva is in there.
Sure.
So, and I'm not against parasitic wasps because they're kind of cool too, but but in any case, the people do want us to try to, there can be, not good fungus and mold in there that can cause the larva to die.
Okay.
So you're aware. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thanks.
Does anyone else have any questions? I also want to mention that we will be emailing Leslie's presentation out, hopefully this week after we have the YouTube link as well. So please be patient, but we will be sending that out to you this week. Any other questions?
Well, my email address is habitat@naturalhabitatevanston.org. And I welcome positive, negative, meh comments back. So, I'd love to hear what people thought, or anything I can improve.
And also the library will be having a program, I believe it's April 11th, with Leslie's partner, Allison Sloan, talking about planting native plants. So check the library's website if you'd like to sign up for that.
And she and I are co-lead Natural Habitat Evanston, just partners purely for nature.
Okay, well, feel free to send us additional questions and we'll try to send you answers, and keep an eye on the library website. I'm the ecology librarian working with Bea at Robert Crown. And so she and I are putting our heads together for a number of other ecology programs. And I believe that most of you also know that this is part of our climate resiliency series. So if you're interested in issues surrounding climate resiliency, please sign up for some of our other programs. And thanks for checking in with us tonight and for being so patient about the chat. I promise it won't happen again. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.